This lecture will cover errors and omissions. By the end of the topic, you should be able to identify and correct errors disclosed by the trial balance, and also to identify and correct errors that are not disclosed by the trial balance. The reading that accompanies this lecture is in your Thomas and Ward textbook in chapter 21. So one of the purposes of the trial balance is to check on the accuracy of the double entry to make sure it's actually been performed correctly. If the trial balance doesn't balance, then an error or a number of errors have occurred, and this must be investigated and the errors need to be corrected. So first of all, looking at the errors that are detected by our trial balance. So we have a single entry. So if only one side of the double entry has been performed, so just the debit or just the credit. You could have a casting error. So you've incorrectly totaled up a list of balances, or you've incorrectly totaled up a ledger account or a T account. You might have a transposition error, so you've actually managed to switch the amount around when you've entered it into the accounts or into the trial balance. You could have an extraction error. So the ledger account itself is correct in terms of the entries, but when you've actually taken the account balance into the trial balance, you've recorded the wrong figure or potentially put it on the wrong side of the trial balance. Or you could have an omission error. So if a ledger account balance has been omitted completely from the trial balance, but it does actually exist. Or you could have an error where there's two entries on one side, so two debits, two credits instead of a debit and a credit. So the errors not detected by the trial balance include an error of original entry. So this is where the wrong figure has been entered on both the debit and the credit side of the entry. So it will still balance, it will still be correct in that sense, but the individual underlying accounts will record the wrong amount. There could be a compensating error, so this is where two separate errors have been made, so the debit on one particular account and the credit on another. Just by coincidence, the two errors are the same amount and therefore cancel each other out. There could be an error of omission, so this is where the entire double entry has been completely omitted from the ledger accounts and both the debit and the credit entry are not there, so again the trial balance will still balance. You could have made an error of commission, so this is where the error of the debit and the credit entry is equal, but one of the entries has been made to the wrong account. So for example, electricity expense has been debited to the rent account. They're both expenses, but in this case the electricity expense will be too low and the rent account will be too high. Or there could be an error of principal, similar to an error of commission, but this time an entry has been made to the wrong type of account. So instead of an electricity expense account being debited, it's been put through to a non-current asset account. Again, the debit is made, but to the incorrect account. So errors will normally be corrected by putting through a journal. The procedure for correcting errors is as follows. So step 1, what has been done? So what entries have been made? Secondly, what should have been done? So determine the correct entries that should have been made to record the actual transaction. And thirdly, have a look at what needs to be done to correct it. So produce a journal entry that cancels the incorrect part of the entry and puts through the correct entries. So let's have a look at a short example. So the electricity expense of £450 has been correctly credited to the bank account but has been debited to the rent account. So step 1, what has been done? So we have debited the rent account with 450 and we have credited the bank account with 450. So now step 2, what should have been done? So we should have debited an electricity account with the 450 and credited the bank account with 450. So if we have a look at these entries then, so the bank account is correct in both cases, but what we've actually got to do is correct the fact that we put a debit entry to the rent account instead of the electricity account. So we effectively now have to move this transaction. So step 3, what needs to be done to correct it? So we need to move it from the rent account, so we're going to credit the rent account with 450 and we're going to debit the electricity account with 450. So when we have a trial balance that doesn't balance, then one of the techniques that we can use is to open a suspense account. Now, suspense accounts are only temporary accounts to deal with errors and omissions. So it means that it's possible then to continue on with the production of the financial accounts, and we can take the time to investigate the reasons for the errors and correct them. So a suspense account will arise when either bookkeeper doesn't know what to do with one side of a transaction, or the trial balance doesn't balance and we effectively want to force it to balance. So in the first instance, we're going to have a look at an unknown entry. So in this example, we have a new bookkeeper that's dealing with a cheque received from a garage for £800 for the sale of an old car, correctly debits the bank account with the amount of the cheque, but doesn't know what to do with the credit entry. So in this case, we're going to open up a suspense account. So as it says, the actual entry for the bank has been done. So he's debited the bank to put the £800 into the bank. We need a credit entry because the credit entry on the trial balance will be too low. So we're going to put £800 and it's as a result of the bank account with a receipt for the sale of a car. So now we have the suspense account set up. We will then need to actually investigate where the entry needs to go. So the second reason why we'll use a suspense account is if the debits and the credits don't equal. So we'll effectively open up a suspense account on the face of the trial balance to make it equal. So this is what we've got here when we've created a suspense account balance on the debit side, as the debits are lower than the credits, and that £1,077 will need to be investigated to find out the reason for the imbalance, and it will need to be corrected. So once we have a suspense account opened, regardless of why it was opened, it's only ever going to be a temporary account, and we do need to investigate why there is a difference, identify the error and find out what has happened. It then needs to be corrected, and we're going to correct that via a journal. The suspense account needs to be cleared back to 0. So just like previously, the 3 questions that we're going to ask ourselves: first of all, what has been done? Secondly, what should have been done? And thirdly, what do we need to do to correct it? So again, let's have a look at a short example. So here we have a trial balance has been extracted. It didn't balance. The debit column totaled 200,139 and the credit column totaled 200,239. So you've discovered that cash purchases of £100 has been correctly entered into the cash account, but no entry has been made into the purchases account. So we need to construct a journal entry to correct this error. So again, we're going to ask ourselves the 3 questions. So step 1, what has been done? And so we've got a blank debit entry. No entry's been made for these purchases. In terms of a credit entry, we've actually credited the cash account correctly with the £100, which creates the imbalance in the first place. So at this point we would have opened up a suspense account and we would have entered a £100 debit entry for the trial balance in order for it to balance. So now we're at this point, we can then say, right, what is our step 2 question? So what should have been done? So in order to record a cash purchase, we should have debited our purchases with £100 and credited cash with the £100. So that's the entry that needs to have been done. So our final step 3, what needs to be done to correct it? So the cash account is correct, so we can't actually put another entry through to the cash account. And what we need to do is put an entry through to debit the purchases. So what we actually are going to do is we're going to clear our suspense account with the credit entry. So we're going to debit our purchases account with the £100 cash purchases, and we're going to credit our suspense account to clear the £100 of the original single-sided entry. And now we're in a position whereby we can continue and we can draw up the financial statements. So once the suspense account has been cleared, it's important to redraft the trial balance to ensure that the debit column and the credit columns agree. So having a look at this example. So on the 30th of November 2017, an initial trial balance was extracted and it didn't balance. A suspense account was opened on the 1st December 2017. Journal entries were prepared to correct the errors that had been found and to clear the suspense account. The list of balances and the journal entries are given below. So we are going to redraft the trial balance by placing the figures in either the debit or the credit column after taking into account the journal entries at the bottom that will clear the suspense account. So if we have a look then, so we've got in our first journal entry, we're going to debit our suspense account with £9 and we're going to credit motor expenses with £9 that came about because of a transposition error. So in terms of my list of balances, the suspense account is a debit balance already, so the £9 debit to suspense will increase it. And the motor expenses is sitting at £247 and the £9 will go on there to decrease it. The second error that we've got is that we got an unknown cheque which has now been sorted, and we found that it's due to drawings being taken out by the owner. So our entries to correct that would be to credit the suspense account with £500, so reduce the debit balance by £500, and to increase our drawings account by £500 with the owner taking money out of the business. So we're going to take off £500 from the suspense account, and we're going to add it to the drawings account to increase its debit balance. So now we're in a position whereby we've put the journal entries through to the trial balance, so we can effectively now go across and transfer the list of balances into our trial balance and double check that it adds up. So motor vehicles is an asset, so that will be a debit of 10,500. Inventory is also an asset, so that will be a debit of 2,497. Bank overdraft is a liability, it's owed back to the bank, so we have a credit entry of 1495. Petty cash, you can never go overdrawn in the petty cash tin. You can't take more money out than what you actually put in, so petty cash will be an asset and therefore a debit of 162. Trade receivables, so the customers that you sold to on credit now owe you the money. That's an asset to you, so again a debit of 6811. Trade payables, money that you owe back to your suppliers, so that's a credit entry as being a liability of 2104. VAT owing to the tax authorities, so it's a liability to the HM Revenue and Customs, so that will be a liability of 1329. Capital is a unique liability, it's money that's owed back to the owners, so again it is a credit entry of 15,000. Sales is an income and as such will be a credit entry of 47,036. Purchases is an expense, so it will be a debit entry of 27,914. We then have our purchase returns, so purchase returns reduce purchases, so they're effectively a negative against the debit, so they will actually be recorded as a credit entry of 558. Wages as an expense is 12,000 debit. We then have our adjustments that we've made, so motor expenses was originally 947, take off the 9 that was created due to a transposition error, so now we have motor expenses of a debit of 938. Drawings is also the other entry that was affected, so we've got an increase in drawings, so now we're going to have 6,700 worth of drawings, and the suspense account is now cleared. So the last step that we need to do is to actually total up our debits and credits and check that it actually balances. So if for any reason the trial balance doesn't balance, then the reason has to be discovered. Rather than going back to each ledger account and checking each entry to find the cause of the imbalance, it makes sense both in practice and in any assessments to take a logical approach to trying to find the causes of an imbalance. So a potential procedure to follow to help you with this. So first of all, check the totaling of the debit column and the credit column on the trial balance. Secondly, calculate the difference between the total debits and the total credits. It might become useful later on if you have difficulty finding the error that was made. You could then, step 3, check each balance in the trial balance that it's been correctly copied into the trial balance on the correct side, debit or credit. Step 4, check all of the balances in the main ledger to make sure they've actually been included in the trial balance, particularly the bank balance and the petty cash balances. Could have been kept separately in their own ledgers. Fifthly, check the calculation of the balance on each ledger account, make sure it's correct. Step 6, have a look in the ledger accounts to see if you can find an entry for the same amount of the difference on the trial balance. If you do find this amount, then have a look to see whether the double entry has been performed correctly. Step 7, look in the ledger accounts for anything that's half the amount of the difference on the trial balance, and have a look to see again whether the double entry has been carried out correctly. So if you ended up with 2 debits or 2 credits, If everything else fails and it doesn't solve your issues, then you need to go back to all of the bookkeeping entries since the date of the last trial balance and work through each and individual transaction to make sure it has been recorded correctly. So a number of tricks to look out for. If the difference on the trial balance is divisible by 12, then an error is likely to be a transposition error, so you could have reversed 2 of the digits. If the difference on the trial balance is a round number, so 10, 100, 1000, etc., then it's likely that you've made an arithmetic error rather than a double entry error. You need to take care in both situations. Now I'd like you to have a go at the quiz that's on the Moodle page to see how much of this that you've actually understood and taken on board, and in class we will then further move on to look at questions from your question bank. Thank you ever so much for your time. Speak to you all soon.